The crystal chandeliers of the Donovan estate cast dancing shadows across the marble floors as real estate mogul Marcus Donovan adjusted his Italian silk tie, preparing for the most important business dinner of his career. At 54, Marcus had built his empire from a single Manhattan apartment building into a global real estate conglomerate worth $47 billion. And tonight's dinner with international investors could expand his reach into European markets worth trillions. His Hamptons mansion, a sprawling 40-room estate overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, served as the perfect backdrop for impressing the sophisticated European businessmen who would determine whether his company gained access to premium development opportunities in Rome, Milan, and Naples. Everything had to be flawless: the food, the wine, the service, and most importantly, the impression that Marcus Donovan was a man of refinement and international sophistication. Elena Rossi moved quietly through the mansion's grand dining room, adjusting place settings and ensuring that every crystal glass sparkled under the ornate lighting. At 38, she had worked as head housekeeper for the Donovan family for 2 years, maintaining the pristine condition of their estate while remaining largely invisible to the wealthy couple who employed her. Born in a small village outside Florence, Elena had immigrated to America 12 years earlier, with dreams of opening her own restaurant. But economic necessity had led her into domestic service for families wealthy enough to afford her meticulous attention to detail. What Marcus didn't know about Elena was that beneath her modest uniform and deferential manner was a woman of remarkable intelligence and education. She held a degree in art history from the University of Florence, spoke 4 languages fluently, and possessed an intimate knowledge of Italian culture, cuisine, and business practices that would have impressed even his sophisticated dinner guests. Her work as a housekeeper was temporary necessity, not permanent circumstance, though the Donovans had never bothered to learn anything about her background or aspirations. Marcus's wife Vivian swept into the dining room wearing a stunning black evening gown that probably cost more than Elena's annual salary, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her jewelry catching the light as she moved. At 42, Vivian had married Marcus 15 years earlier for his money rather than love, a calculation that had provided her with unlimited luxury but little emotional satisfaction. Their marriage had become a business arrangement built on mutual benefit rather than genuine affection, though they maintained the facade of domestic bliss for social and professional purposes. "Elena," Vivian said sharply, examining the table settings with critical eyes, "make sure the wine glasses are positioned exactly 2 inches from the knife tips. These Italian investors notice details like that." "Si, Signora Donovan," Elena replied quietly, making the requested adjustments with practiced efficiency. Marcus looked up from his business documents, his attention caught by Elena's response. "What did you just say?" "I said yes, Mr. Donovan. I will adjust the glasses." "No, you said something in Italian," Marcus said, his voice taking on the condescending tone he used when asserting his authority over household staff. "I don't want you speaking foreign languages around our guests tonight. It's unprofessional and makes you sound like some peasant who doesn't understand proper English." Elena felt her cheeks burn with humiliation at the casual cruelty of his words, but she maintained her composure. "I apologize, Mr. Donovan. I will speak only English this evening." But Marcus wasn't finished with his display of superiority. "You know, Elena, since we're entertaining Italian businessmen tonight, you should probably avoid speaking at all unless absolutely necessary. Your broken English and whatever village dialect you speak would embarrass us in front of sophisticated Europeans who actually understand proper Italian culture." The insult hit Elena like a physical blow. Her Italian wasn't a village dialect. It was the educated Tuscan Italian of someone who had studied at one of Italy's most prestigious universities. More painfully, Marcus's assumption that she was an uneducated peasant reflected exactly the kind of American arrogance that she'd encountered repeatedly since immigrating. "I understand, sir," Elena said quietly, her voice betraying none of the anger and hurt raging inside her. Vivian barely looked up from her phone as she added her own casual cruelty to the conversation. "Marcus is right, Elena. These investors are very cultured people who would notice immediately if you tried to speak Italian improperly. It's better if you just serve quietly and let us handle all the conversation." What neither Marcus nor Vivian realized was that Elena understood much more about their lives than they imagined. Her work maintaining their household had given her intimate access to their private spaces, their personal documents, and, most importantly, their unguarded conversations. She knew about Marcus's tax avoidance schemes, Vivian's excessive spending habits, and the growing tensions in their marriage that they concealed from the outside world. More significantly, Elena knew about Vivian's affair with Alessandro Romano, a charming Italian art dealer who had been advising her on acquisitions for the past 8 months. Elena had discovered the relationship by accident when she'd encountered Alessandro leaving through the estate's service entrance during one of Marcus's business trips. Subsequent observation had revealed the full scope of Vivian's betrayal: regular meetings at expensive hotels, intimate phone conversations conducted in rapid Italian, and expensive gifts that Vivian claimed were art investments but were clearly tokens of romantic affection. The irony was devastating. Marcus had just insulted Elena's Italian while completely unaware that his wife was conducting an affair entirely in the language he'd dismissed as peasant dialect. Alessandro Romano spoke the elegant Italian of educated Romans, but Vivian's responses revealed her to be little more than a tourist with phrasebook Italian, struggling to communicate with her lover in romantic platitudes she'd clearly memorized rather than understood. As the guests began arriving for Marcus's crucial dinner, Elena retreated to the kitchen to coordinate with the catering staff, her mind churning with anger at the casual discrimination she'd endured. She'd spent 2 years maintaining the Donovans' perfect lifestyle, while they treated her as little more than an intelligent piece of furniture, never acknowledging her humanity or capabilities. The Italian investors proved to be exactly the sophisticated Europeans that Marcus had hoped to impress. Giovanni Marchetti, CEO of Marchetti Development Group, spoke with the refined accent of Roman aristocracy. Francesca Bianchi, representing Tuscan heritage properties, displayed the kind of cultural knowledge that came from generations of Italian breeding. Dr. Antonio Ricci, the financial consultant coordinating the European expansion, possessed the intellectual bearing of someone educated at the continent's finest universities. As Elena served the first course, she listened to the conversation with growing amusement. Marcus was attempting to demonstrate his cultural sophistication by dropping Italian phrases into his conversation, but his pronunciation was so poor that the Italian guests exchanged subtle glances of barely concealed embarrassment. As we say in Italia, Marcus declared with confident ignorance, "Quando in Roma, fai come fanno I Romani." His attempt at, quote, "when in Rome, do as the Romans do," was so mangled that Dr. Ricci actually winced. Indeed, Giovanni Marchetti replied diplomatically, his perfect English betraying no hint of the linguistic massacre he'd just witnessed. But the evening's most revealing moment came when Vivian attempted to demonstrate her own Italian sophistication, clearly hoping to impress the investors with her supposed cultural knowledge. "I've been studying Italian art and culture extensively," Vivian announced, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed her own lies. "In fact, I've been working with a wonderful consultant from Roma who's been teaching me about authentic Italian aesthetics." Francesca Bianchi leaned forward with genuine interest. "How wonderful! Chi è questo consulente? What is this consultant's name?" Vivian's face flushed slightly as she realized she'd stepped into deeper cultural waters than she could navigate. "His name is Alessandro Romano. Perhaps you know him?" "He's very well connected in the Italian art world." Elena nearly dropped the wine bottle she was holding as she realized Vivian was actually discussing her lover with potential business partners, apparently unaware that her affair could destroy both Marcus's business deal and their marriage. Dr. Ricci frowned thoughtfully. "Alessandro Romano. See, I know of him. He has a somewhat questionable reputation in Roma. There have been rumors about his business practices, his relationship with married clients." The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by Giovanni Marchetti's diplomatic intervention. "Perhaps we should focus on the development opportunities rather than personal acquaintances." But Elena had heard enough. The combination of Marcus's earlier insult and Vivian's casual discussion of her affair had pushed her beyond the limits of professional tolerance. These people had treated her as invisible and intellectually inferior, while conducting their deceptions and betrayals in what they assumed was the privacy of their own superiority. As she moved around the table refilling wine glasses, Elena made a decision that would change all their lives forever. When she reached Vivian's chair, she spoke in perfect, elegant Italian that silenced the entire table with its unexpected fluency and sophistication. "Signora Donovan," Elena said, her voice carrying the refined accent of educated Tuscany, "forse dovrebbe stare più attenta quando parla del suo amante davanti agli investitori del marito. Perhaps you should be more careful when discussing your lover in front of your husband's investors." The dining room fell into shocked silence as the Italian guests immediately understood what Elena had said, while Marcus and Vivian stared in confusion at the sudden change in their housekeeper's demeanor and obvious linguistic capabilities. Francesca Bianchi's eyes widened with understanding and barely suppressed scandal. Giovanni Marchetti set down his wine glass carefully, clearly recognizing that he'd just witnessed a family drama unfold in his native language. Dr. Ricci looked between Elena and Vivian with the fascination of someone watching a slow-motion catastrophe. "What did she just say?" Marcus demanded, his voice sharp with confusion and growing alarm. Elena turned to address him directly, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had endured enough condescension for one lifetime. "I told your wife that she should be more careful when discussing Alessandro Romano in front of your business guests, Mr. Donovan. Especially since they already know his reputation for seducing married American women." Vivian's face went white as she realized that Elena had not only understood every word of the earlier conversation, but possessed the cultural knowledge to expose her affair in the most devastating possible way. "Elena, you don't understand what you're—" "I understand perfectly, signora," Elena interrupted, switching back to Italian for the benefit of the increasingly fascinated guests. "Capisco che Alessandro Romano viene a questa casa ogni martedì quando suo marito è in viaggio d'affari. Capisco che lei, GLI, ha dato $50.000 per investimenti artistici che in realtà erano regali per il suo amante. I understand that Alessandro Romano comes to this house every Tuesday when your husband is on business trips. I understand that you've given him $50,000 for art investments that were actually gifts for your lover." The Italian investors were now openly staring at the unfolding drama, their business dinner transformed into front-row seats for an American domestic scandal being conducted in their native language. Marcus looked between his wife and his housekeeper with growing comprehension and rage. "Vivian," Marcus said slowly, his voice deadly quiet, "is what Elena is saying true?" But Elena wasn't finished with her revelation. Switching back to English so that Marcus could understand every devastating detail, she continued her systematic destruction of the lies that had surrounded her for 2 years. "Your wife has been having an affair with Alessandro Romano for 8 months, Mr. Donovan. He comes to this house every Tuesday afternoon when you're traveling. She's given him expensive gifts that she's hidden from you by claiming they're art investments. Last week, I overheard her on the phone telling him that she was planning to divorce you after your European business deals are finalized, because she wants to move to Italy with him." Marcus's face cycled through shock, betrayal, and finally settling on cold fury as he turned to face his wife. "Vivian?" Vivian attempted to maintain her composure, but her hands were shaking as she reached for her wine glass. "Marcus, this is ridiculous. Elena is obviously—" "Alessandro Romano," Dr. Ricci interrupted quietly, "is known in Roma for targeting wealthy American women. He specializes in convincing them to invest in false art schemes while conducting romantic affairs. We've seen this pattern before." The confirmation from a respected Italian businessman was the final nail in Vivian's coffin. Marcus turned back to Elena, his voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "How do you know all this? How do you speak Italian so well?" Elena smiled with the quiet dignity of someone who had finally revealed her true self after years of hiding behind false assumptions. "I have a degree in art history from the University of Florence, Mr. Donovan. I speak Italian, English, French, and Spanish fluently. I've been working as your housekeeper while saving money to open my own restaurant, but I've been observing your household more carefully than you realized." Quote, she turned to address the Italian guest directly, her cultured Italian making it clear that she was far more sophisticated than anyone at the table had assumed. "Signori, mi scuso per questo disturbo durante la vostra cena. Ma non potevo più tollerare di essere trattata come ignorante mentre assistevo a questa farsa. Gentlemen, I apologize for this disturbance during your dinner, but I could no longer tolerate being treated as ignorant while witnessing this farce." Giovanni Marchetti actually smiled, clearly impressed by Elena's courage and linguistic abilities. "Signorina, il suo italiano è perfetto. Where in Tuscany are you from?" "From a small village outside Florence," Elena replied in English for Marcus's benefit, "where we learn to speak properly before we presume to judge others." The insult was subtle but devastating, reminding everyone at the table of Marcus's earlier condescension about Elena's supposed peasant dialect. Francesca Bianchi actually laughed, delighted by the reversal of assumptions that had just occurred. Marcus looked around the table, Realizing that his business dinner had become a complete disaster, and his marriage had been exposed as a fraud in front of the very people he'd hoped to impress. Elena, I owe you an apology, and apparently much more than that. You owe me respect, Mr. Donovan, Elena replied firmly, which you've never given me, despite my education, my work ethic, and my contributions to maintaining your household. Vivian finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak than her usual confident tone. Elena, you can't prove any of these accusations. Elena reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone, scrolling to a series of photographs and text messages. Actually, Senora, I can. I have photographs of Alessandro leaving through the service entrance. I have copies of the credit card statements showing your payments to him. And I have recordings of your phone conversations, which you conducted in the kitchen while I was working, apparently believing I couldn't understand Italian. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Vivian's affair wasn't just exposed, it was documented in excruciating detail by someone she'd dismissed as intellectually incapable of understanding her deception. Dr. Ricci shook his head sadly. Signora Donovan, Alessandro Romano is currently under investigation by Italian authorities for fraud and extortion. You should consider yourself fortunate that this exposure happened before you lost more money to his schemes. The dinner party dissolved into chaos as Marcus demanded that Vivian leave the house immediately. The Italian investors discussed whether they could conduct business with someone whose personal life was so clearly compromised, and Elena found herself at the center of a scandal that would likely end her employment, but had finally given her the satisfaction of revealing her true capabilities. As the guests departed and lawyers were called to begin divorce proceedings, Marcus found himself alone with Elena in the dining room where his evening of triumph had become a night of devastating revelation. Elena, he said quietly, I don't know how to apologize for how I've treated you. You've been working here for 2 years, and I never bothered to learn anything about who you really are. Elena began clearing the abandoned dinner plates, her movements efficient despite the emotional turmoil of the evening. Mr. Donovan, you assumed I was ignorant because I clean houses for a living. You never considered that I might be educated, cultured, or capable of understanding the world around me. You're right, Marcus admitted, his arrogance finally replaced by genuine humility. I was completely wrong about you, and I'm deeply sorry for my ignorance and prejudice. Elena paused in her work, studying the billionaire who had just lost his wife, his business deal, and his assumptions about the people around him. Your apology is appreciated, Mr. Donovan, but the real question is whether you'll learn from this experience or simply find new ways to dismiss people you consider beneath your notice. The question hung in the air as Marcus contemplated the extraordinary reversal of fortune that had occurred in a single evening. His maid had spoken perfect Italian, exposed his wife's affair, impressed his business guests, and revealed herself to be far more sophisticated than he'd ever imagined possible. 6 months later, Elena Rossi stood in the kitchen of her own restaurant, Bella Toscana, which had been financed by the generous settlement Marcus had provided in recognition of her years of service and the devastating accuracy of her revelations about Vivian's affair. The restaurant had become a favorite among New York's Italian community, praised for its authentic cuisine and Elena's sophisticated understanding of traditional Tuscan cooking. Marcus had indeed learned from his humiliation, implementing new policies at his company that focused on recognizing talent regardless of current position or background. His European business deals had ultimately succeeded, largely because the Italian investors had been impressed by his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and learn from them. Vivian's affair with Alessandro Romano had ended predictably when she discovered that he'd stolen nearly $200,000 from her accounts before disappearing back to Italy. Her divorce settlement had been significantly reduced due to Elena's documented evidence of her infidelity and financial deception. On a busy Saturday evening, as Elena supervised her kitchen staff with the same attention to detail she'd once applied to maintaining the Donovan estate, she reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. The billionaire who had insulted her Italian had inadvertently given her the motivation to reclaim her dignity and pursue her dreams. Marcus occasionally visited the restaurant, not as her former employer but as a customer who had learned to appreciate authentic Italian culture from someone who truly understood it. Their relationship had evolved from employer-servant to something resembling mutual respect, built on his acknowledgement of past wrongs and her willingness to forgive ignorance when it was replaced by genuine growth. The maid, who had been dismissed as a peasant-speaking village dialect, had revealed herself to be more cultured, more educated, and more observant than any of the wealthy people who had employed her. In exposing Vivian's affair, Elena had done more than seek revenge. She had demonstrated that intelligence, dignity, and sophistication cannot be measured by bank accounts or social status. The evening that began with casual insults about her language skills had ended with Elena speaking truth in perfect Italian, proving that sometimes the most devastating revelations come from those who have been consistently underestimated. The billionaire couldn't believe his wife's affair, but he was forced to believe that the woman he'd dismissed as ignorant possessed wisdom, courage, and cultural knowledge that far exceeded his own. In the end, Elena's restaurant became a testament to the truth that real sophistication comes from understanding and respecting others, not from the accident of birth or the accumulation of wealth. The Italian maid had indeed revealed the affair, but more importantly, she had revealed the dangers of judging people by their circumstances rather than their character. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in languages we don't expect, delivered by people we've taught ourselves not to see. And sometimes the greatest revelations come not from expensive investigators or sophisticated surveillance, but from those who have been watching, listening, and understanding far more than anyone realized. The perfect Italian had exposed imperfect lives, proving that truth has a way of surfacing when spoken by those brave enough to demand the respect they've always deserved. 2 years after opening Bella Toscana, Elena stood in her restaurant's private dining room hosting an elegant celebration dinner. The guest list was small but distinguished. Marcus Donovan, Dr. Antonio Ricci, Giovanni Marchetti, and several other prominent figures from that fateful evening when her life had seemingly transformed from housekeeper to successful restaurateur. As dessert was served, Elena raised her wine glass with a smile that carried a hint of something deeper than simple gratitude. I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate not just my restaurant's success, but the completion of a very long and complex project. Marcus looked puzzled. Project? Elena, what do you mean? Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gleaming federal badge. My name is actually Agent Elena Rossi, FBI Financial Crimes Division. I've been working undercover for the past 3 years investigating international money laundering operations connected to several real estate development firms. The room fell into stunned silence as the implications hit everyone simultaneously. Marcus's face went pale as he realized the woman he'd insulted and dismissed had been a federal agent with the power to destroy his entire empire. "Your FBI?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Fluent in 4 languages, with degrees in both art history and criminal justice, Elena continued calmly. I was placed in your household specifically to investigate your offshore financial activities and connections to several suspicious European development projects. Dr. Ricci began laughing with genuine admiration. Brillante, you had us all completely fooled. Quote, "The beautiful irony," Elena said, her eyes twinkling with satisfaction, "is that your wife's affair with Alessandro Romano was never part of my investigation. That was simply, a bonus discovery. Alessandro really was a con artist, but Vivian's stupidity was entirely separate from your criminal activities." Marcus slumped in his chair as the full scope of his situation became clear. "How long have you known about my offshore accounts?" "Since my 2nd week in your employment," Elena replied matter-of-factly. "Your home office security was embarrassingly weak for a billionaire. I've had access to all your financial records, business communications, and international transactions for nearly 3 years." She turned to address the Italian investors, her smile becoming genuinely warm. "Gentlemen, I should mention that you were never actually under investigation. In fact, your cooperation tonight has been invaluable in helping us understand the full scope of Mr. Donovan's operations." Giovanni Marchetti raised his glass in salute. "Agent Rossi, you are perhaps the most impressive law enforcement officer I have ever encountered. Your performance was flawless." "Thank you," Elena said graciously, though I must admit, putting up with Marcus's condescension about my peasant Italian was the most challenging part of my entire undercover assignment. Marcus looked around the table, finally understanding that he was surrounded not by business associates but by federal agents and cooperating witnesses. This whole dinner, tonight, it's all been a carefully orchestrated conclusion to Operation Bella Vista, Elena confirmed. Named, appropriately, after the beautiful view from your estate, where I spent 3 years gathering evidence of your crimes. She stood up, her demeanor shifting from restaurateur to federal agent with practiced ease. "Marcus Donovan, you're under arrest for money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud," Your assets are being frozen as we speak, and teams are currently executing search warrants at all your properties." As federal agents entered the restaurant to take Marcus into custody, Elena reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. The billionaire who had insulted her Italian and dismissed her intelligence was being arrested by the very woman he'd underestimated so completely. "You know what the truly beautiful part is, Marcus?" Elena said as the handcuffs were applied. "If you had simply treated me with basic human respect, if you had seen me as a person rather than furniture, you might have realized that your housekeeper was paying unusually close attention to your business activities. Your arrogance was ultimately your downfall." As Marcus was led away, Dr. Ricci approached Elena with genuine admiration. "Agent Rossi, that was perhaps the most elegant long-term undercover operation I've ever witnessed." Elena smiled, finally able to reveal her true self after years of careful performance. "Sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight. Rich people see what they expect to see, and they expected to see an uneducated immigrant grateful for any work. They never imagined they were employing someone with the authority to destroy their entire criminal enterprise." The restaurant Bella Toscana was real, funded not by Marcus's settlement but by the FBI as part of Elena's deep cover identity. The success of her investigation would likely make her a legend in federal law enforcement circles, the agent who brought down a multi-billion-dollar money laundering operation by pretending to dust furniture and serve coffee. The billionaire had insulted the maid's Italian, never realizing he was mocking a federal agent who spoke 4 languages fluently and had been systematically documenting his crimes for 3 years. She had indeed revealed his wife's affair to everyone, but that had been just the appetizer before serving him a life sentence as the main course. In the end, Elena Rossi proved that the most dangerous adversaries are those who appear completely harmless, and that sometimes the person cleaning your house is actually cleaning house in ways you never saw coming. The mind-blowing truth was that while Marcus thought he was hiring a maid, he had actually been paying a federal agent to gather evidence that would send him to prison for the rest of his life. The perfect Italian had exposed much more than an imperfect marriage. It had brought down an entire criminal empire, one carefully observed conversation at a time,